I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Kent Dykstra, and I'm the AMS president. AMS, of course, is one of the member associations of the Federation of Independent School Associations of BC, the FISA, that most of us know about. If you are not an administrator, but you're a teacher, you might not be aware of what FISA does. Basically, what we try to do is advocate on behalf of independent schools in BC, mostly to the provincial government. But we try to assist schools in whatever way we can. I don't work for the FISA. I'm simply a board member, but I'm also, as I mentioned, affiliated with the AMS, which is a group of schools that I anticipate all of us are also members of. Janet Denani. Janet is the Assistant Executive Director of the FISA and also the Chief Administrator for the AMS group. And we're very grateful that Janet is organizing these Zoom chats. If this is the first Zoom chat that you've been on, we've done a number of them with a whole range of topics. And we're excited to have Greg Gerber come back for his second Zoom chat on making videos, basically video composition, recording, and virtual enhancement. So I'm going to pass it over to him in just a minute. But before I do, I'm guessing that everybody knows Zoom. But just in case you don't, very briefly, the mute button is on the bottom left, and I'll be muting my mic here in just a minute. And if you haven't done that yet, I'd ask you to do that simply so that we don't hear your background noise. There's also a video mute button, and I'm going to be using that button in a minute as well. It's up to you whether we see your face or whether you'd just like to be a blank black screen with a name. That's completely up to you, and I'll leave that decision in your hands. There's also a share screen button, bottom center. Don't use that one. In fact, I don't even think you can. The one you want to use is a chat button. And that's the one that you want to use if Greg is talking about something and you want to ask a question, but you don't want to interrupt him. Push that chat button like I'm doing right now. There we go. And you're going to get a Zoom chat box. And I'm going to go, hello, everyone, and push enter. And oh, somebody else has helped me out there as well. And you'll see that I can send a little message to everyone. So if you've got a question, and there's not really a chance for you to ask it, feel free to just type it in that chat box and we will do our best to get to it. I'm going to introduce Greg Gerber. Many of you know as he formerly was with the Society of Christian Schools of BC, and now he's working with the City University of New York, but their Vancouver campus. And we're very pleased that he is with us. And Greg, thanks for making the time. And I'm simply going to pass things over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And great to see you all. It's great to be here and spend some time with you again today. As you can see over my shoulder, we are going to be talking about two things really specifically. And I'll get into that in just a second. I should just correct and mention that I am Professor and Dean of Instructional Technology at the New York Institute of Tech. So think BCIT by New York, and you'll have the right idea of what we're doing. So today what I really want to take a look at is supercharging video. How do we do that in service of learning? What does it take? What are some of the secrets to really make it look good, which goes beyond using our video camera and doing an address to our students, or beyond simply creating a screen recording, which most of us know how to do. Now I'm going to speak first specifically to how do we do the recording locally. Again, bearing in mind the privacy implications of using cloud-based recording solutions. We want to make sure that we understand we can do this all on our own computer, whether you're on a Mac or a PC or Linux. Chromebook has its challenges, and so I won't really be speaking to Chromebooks at all today. So I'm going to assume you're on one of those three major platforms. We'll begin by looking at what's probably the best way right now with the most power to do local recordings, which of course, after you record those sessions, with screens in the background, similar to what I'm doing here. You can post those to the cloud, of course, and share those with your students, but do so inside of your own learning management system, which already has informed consent from parents, so that you're not breaking any laws. And that's important. So we want to start with that. Then second, and I'm not going to focus on this today, but how do we take any video composition like what you see right now and transfer that through Zoom the way I'm doing so? And I'll talk about that briefly, and I pretty much guarantee that there will be a good number of follow-up questions that come from that, which I'm willing to answer at any time going forward. So Kent or Janet will give you my contact information, and we can work together on that accord. So let's jump into this here: supercharging video for recording and professional remote broadcast. We're going to look at one particular piece of software to start us off with, which is what I'm using right now, and it's called OBS Studio, which stands for Open Broadcast System Studio. This application is open source, meaning it's entirely free. There are never any fees, and it's also immensely popular amongst YouTubers and Twitch streamers. Okay. A lot of your churches right now and public institutions that are broadcasting on a regular basis are starting to use OBS Studio. I know I've been working with a number of organizations to help them do so for Sunday services, etc. So we're going to talk first about how do we actually compose a video scene. Now, required software. What do we need? Well, let's take a quick look, and I'll zoom in a little bit here for you. There are two elements that you are going to require, or one element that you're going to require here, which is the OBS Studio. And you can see the link, obsproject.com/download. And I'm guessing that somebody's already typing that into the chat window for you, so you can copy and paste. OBS Studio runs on all three platforms, as you can see right here above my head: the Windows platform, Mac, and Linux. Now, this is the Cadillac for creating screen recording or tutorial compositions. So this is way beyond screen recording. While that's one element of it, there's so much more that we can do, including multiple cameras, incorporating our background or particular pieces of software that are open on our desktop, video files, audio, and of course, static images. Now, if that's too much, maybe for some of your students or something like that, there is a less powerful but still impressive option, which you can see there in the APowerSoft, and that is also free. However, my caveat on using any of those softwares you'll find if you search for free desktop capture or free screen recording and this sort of thing, 90 to 95% of the hits that you'll find are cloud recording applications. And again, in our context in British Columbia, I want to always remind you about the privacy implications of using those services. And it requires informed consent. And so if you were using it just to train students or create a tutorial and there's no private information, they work wonderfully. But we need to always bear in mind the privacy implications. Okay, so you'll have those links that you can take a look at later as well. Now, this is OBS Studio. I'm actually showing you a still image of it right now, just so that it stays nice and clean. This is what it looks like in the default mode when you first install it. And it can be a little bit scary the first time you see it, because there's so many windows or so many panes, and we need to recognize what's going on. So I want to speak very specifically about where you want to begin to make this program work for you. And the first place that we're going to focus our attention on is the very far left here, where you can see the scenes pane. Okay. Now let's zoom in on the scenes. Down in the bottom of the pane, you'll see that both the scenes and the sources have these little icons for adding or deleting and reordering. Okay. Now in the sources, we have this extra little button, the cog, which is for settings. But the way to think about this is that your scene is a composition of a whole bunch of elements, just like in the movie business. I'm thinking about a background, I'm thinking about my foreground, I'm thinking about my audio, and I'm thinking about maybe my logos or my watermarks for my organization, for my school, for AMS, for Safer Schools Together, for whomever that might be. So the scene is the full composition. The source is the layering of all those different pieces. As soon as we recognize and understand that we can add as many layers as we want on top of each other, as you see here with motion backgrounds and audio and desktop, text layers, graphics, and webcam, all of those get compressed into the scene. If I put something else on top by accident, then all of a sudden I may not be able to see one of my other elements. If you've ever done Photoshop or photo editing or anything like that, you're very familiar with this concept of layers. I've found that this is the most difficult aspect for people to understand, is one scene can have multiple sources, and I need to ensure that I have those sources enabled, that they are made visible so that I get them in the composition. Now, I think I'm working with a really fast group here, so this probably makes a ton of sense. So let's go take a look at the next piece here, which is once we're working with the sources. So I recognize my sources are all contributing to the composition of my scene. But once I'm working with the sources in that source pane, I can now add as many effects and filters as I please to each layer. Depending on the kind of layer I'm using, there will be different effects and different filters available. For example, right now you can see behind me, this is actually my second monitor. On my second monitor, I'm playing a PowerPoint show. It's a PowerPoint presentation, which is why it's animating nicely. Well, it's behind me because I've layered my video on top of my second monitor. So I'm on a 2-monitor system right now. Anything I put on my second monitor will show behind me because of how I've composed the scene. Okay, so we get that scene, all the sources, and of course the effects and filters. Why can we see through my actual background that the video camera is picking up? Well, that's because I have a green screen behind me. That green screen has a filter on the video layer which says, if you see green, delete it. And that's why we can see clearly through my background, including my chair. You can't see it, but now I'm leaning over my chair, and now you can start to make out the sides of it. Well, why is it green screened? I put one of my green t-shirts over top of the backrest of my chair. Provided I don't make too many shadows, it looks like it doesn't exist, and I have very good posture, don't I? No, I don't. All right, so you get the idea. I'll keep on moving on. The next piece that we look at is the preview window, which is only viewable if I've actually turned on studio mode so I can see, and that's the button over in the top right, just above my head here, so that I can see both the preview window, which means I can pre-compose things before transitioning and sending them over to the program window. The program window is what you're seeing right now. So anything that is in my program window is either what I'm recording or what I'm sending to Zoom or Google Meet or Cisco WebEx. And I'm not saying Teams on purpose, and there's a reason for that. Okay. So in a nutshell, we recognize we have the scenes, sources which compose those scenes, filters and effects that we can apply to sources. We can preview our composition, and then once we transition, it sends it over to our program window. Okay. So I'm actually going to back up here for a moment, and now what I'm going to do is go to a live view of my OBS studio. And what you'll see on one side is, because I'm sharing my desktop, you'll see in the program window that I get a whole bunch of windowing, and that's as a result of recording a screen that is looking at my desktop and what I'm actually sending out. So you're going to see multiple windowing, and you'll want to kind of ignore that. Okay, so here we go. All right, so here you can see that windowing I was talking about on the far right. Ignore my little program window. Instead, we're going to look at the preview. I'm going to show you how we can create those compositions of scenes. Now, first of all, you see that I have a whole bunch of scenes created, and these are the ones that I switch between with my transition. Okay. Right now I have it set to black, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new scene. So I just hit that little plus button in the bottom right-hand corner, okay? And I'm going to add this scene and call it example scene. Now I have an example scene, and even though I'm sending something out of my program window, which is what you're viewing right now, I can still compose a second scene while this is taking place. So I have my placeholder for the composition. Next, we're going to add some sources, and I click plus. What you want to note here is that there are all kinds of things you can add to your sources to create those different layers. I'll talk about each one really briefly. Number one is if you want to record your voice while you're doing a recording, you need to add an audio input capture. What does that mean? Add your microphone. So if I click add my microphone or add my audio input, I can give it a name of whatever I'd like. There's a bunch of gobbledygook, and say okay and go choose my microphone. Then once I've done that, I will have the configuration for that mic. So I've already configured mine, of course. So I'll show you what that looks like this way. This is one of my default microphones on the computer. And you'll see that I can choose, because it's my default, it goes directly to my default, but I could choose different microphones that are also associated with my computer. Maybe I want this to be the microphone on the webcam, and I'd say okay. Now I have that audio, and it was that simple. This little eyeball that you see here is whether or not it's enabled. It's kind of like in Photoshop. If I poke the eyeball, it becomes invisible like that. That now means that this microphone is not a part of my composition. Only the placeholder is there. If I want it enabled, it needs to be lit up. If I press this little lock button, it means I can't change the settings anymore. And once I have something the way I like it, I press lock and I won't accidentally do something funky with it. Now, my own practice is I don't use the lock button often, but it's good to know that it's there. Next, we might say, well, it would be valuable for me to have an image in the background. So I can create a new image and give it any name I would like. Now you'll notice my naming convention is if it's a background image, I start with all caps _ and then some description. That makes it a lot easier for me later to remember which images I'm using, because sometimes I have small inset images or logos, which I'll actually name logo dash, etc. Okay. So for right now, actually, let me just go example. If I create a new image, notice I didn't use my naming convention there. I can browse to any location on my computer that has those images I want. And of course, I've got a whole collection of them here. Let's go with Windows Glass. Okay. So I'm a Windows guy. It now shows in my composition, in my preview window, I can drag the fill handles to make it full screen to be a background. Or of course, if I know that I only want it to be a small piece, I could do something like this, and I could create a whole bunch of different images. Basically, my creativity is the limit here. I can compose it however I like. Keyboard shortcut, Control F, will make it full screen so that I don't have to use the keyboard or the fill handles, okay? And of course, I can layer that below my microphone, should I so choose. Adding others is exactly identical to what I've just done. So that was adding an image, okay? I can add a browser window if I want to lock it to just that window. A color source if I want to create a little background. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to call it Greg. That was silly. But let's say that we actually want this to be blue. And I'm doing this fairly quickly just so that you get the idea. And now I can move it around and of course resize it as you would all expect. So here's my little blue bar, if you will. And I can create this to whatever size we want. And we can also change its opacity settings, okay? So that's actually, oops, I named that incorrectly. So that's Greg and, oh, wrong button, sorry. I meant rename, not remove. See how close they are together? And I want that to be banner. Next, think about the compositions. I can add a text layer. If we do this, again, here we go, and I'm going to add the text. Oops, if only I could spell my own name. There we go. And change the font however I might like to do so. Let's just go something like that. That's too small, isn't it? Perfect. And white is okay for me in this case. And now, of course, notice we can layer it down. I can also expand the size just by dragging that corner fill handle. And we could compose this however we want there to compose it. Notice layer order matters. If I have the banner above my name, the name disappears. There we go. So what's next? Well, let's add my video source. So video capture device is going to be the camera that I'm looking at right now. And in my case, I have multiple cameras attached to the computer. It's already configured as the Logitech, and say, okay. Now the reason I've been green screened already is because my OBS Studio already knows that it's green screened, okay? If I drag this down below the banner, we see that I have this great little banner, and I can of course edit it as much as I would like to. There we go. So it's all centered and I'm happy with that. Okay, now you can play for a long time. Let's take a real quick look at this, my video capture though, and how I actually did the green screening feature, because that's the #1 thing that people ask about, okay? In the filters, which I can also access by clicking on the little icon in the bottom left-hand or in the bottom of the sources window. I like to right click and go filters. You can see that I have a green screen button here. Now, if I poke the eye out, there you go. There's my screen. Now you can see what I'm actually sitting in front of. Okay. If I turn that green screen back on, it's as simple as grabbing my similarity. Okay. So, well, actually, even before that, choosing the key color type, recognizing I could be sitting in front of a blue screen, but then I wouldn't want to wear anything with a blue tint. A magenta screen, don't wear magenta. Or a custom. Now, if I choose custom, I can go and use a color picker for the solid colored background. The best colored backgrounds are those that don't occur naturally in your skin tones. Okay, I'm going to keep it on green. Now, if I increase the similarity, you'll see what happens to me very quickly. Okay, and you want to find that right balance. And basically what I'm looking for in the preview window is I'm watching for all that green sparkle, okay? Once I see my background nice and clean, I might actually take a look around the edges. Yep, that looks good, and then say close. It's as simple as playing with these three elements, being the similarity, your smoothness, which is how it operates on a pixel level. So if I increase the smoothness, basically it's creating what's called a feather mask. I like to keep it quite sharp, but you'll notice right around my hair, the sharper I go, the more green highlighting we'll have. So I want to smooth that out just by a couple of digits. Okay, and you'll notice that now even some of the mess on my hair starts to go away, but I don't want to make it too high. Okay, I typically like it around 9 or 13. And then the key color spill reduction will remove some of the green shadowing around the edges, but also you have to be careful because it will remove colors from your face and make you look a little dead. So you want to be careful with that. See that? I just turned black and white because of the reduction. So find your appropriate. For me, it's usually around 30 or so. I'll leave it with that at this point. Too much spill reduction makes you look like a ghost. Good enough. You can play with those pieces. Now, of course, what else could we do? Well, I can add, and this is where I'll kind of stop it for a moment. I can add, of course, as many images, as many background sources as I want, but only the sources that are on top of the others will show. So if I'm covering some element of another source, it's obviously not going to be seen. So what can I do? Well, let's do a display capture. Create new, and then you would select which display you're capturing. As I've already told you, I have two displays, my main display, my laptop display, or my secondary monitor. So I'm going to add the secondary monitor, make sure it's made visible, say okay, and notice by default, it puts it to the top of my sources list. Drag that down below, okay? Down below. Now you see, and let me go to something else here. I'll go back to, well, I'll just show you actually. I am going to, what am I going to do here? I am going to do that. I'm going to show a different PowerPoint slide on that main monitor, and you can see that it shows up behind me. Now, if I were doing something, which is what I frequently do, teaching in Firefox or something like that, this is now, I can go to any web page that I want, and you will see everything I'm doing on my web browser right behind me, okay? So I'll type test, and we see the Google results. But of course, in this preview window, we'd start to say, oh, I don't like the composition. You're too big. You still have the name. I see some green screen artifacts over here. That's exactly why you test it like this, because now, of course, I can remove those pieces, grab my Logitech layer, which is my webcam, and go ahead and resize it down to the corner, if that's where I'd like it, okay? And now, of course, I can teach with the internet browser, everything being recorded, etc. If I want to transition over to what you see here, our new composition, which is currently called example scene, I'll transition now. And you can see that we have created a very successful transition, or we've created a very successful scene that is being recorded by my output program. Okay, so what now? Well, as I was noting, you are limited only by your creativity in terms of what you can put together. Here's another example that you saw earlier of a windowed scene, okay? And in this windowed scene, I actually have two image layers. This is an image called a shadow. This is a colored image, so that's two layers. And then inside of that, I've resized my secondary monitor display to fit inside of those two images. So that's, well, I'm layer one, the top. My second layer is this desktop monitor. Third layer is this black line. Fourth layer is this shadow line. Fifth layer is the studio. Sixth layer is my microphone, okay? So once you start thinking like that, this becomes very simple, and you recognize how easy it is to create all of these elements, okay? Now I'm going to take questions in just a minute, but before I do, I want you to put on that secondary thinking cap, and I want to talk about how did I actually make this go to Zoom. So the recording locally is quite easy, as you saw, and I know it's complex. So I mean easy yet complex. But now how do we take that program output, which is what you're seeing right now? How did I take this output from OBS and send it over to Zoom? For that, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint and really quickly illustrate here what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so we have this example of what's going on when we look at working with any sort of online video conferencing session. Well, essentially what you've got going on is you are sitting in front of a video camera. That video camera speaks to your computer software, allows the images in real time to pass to that software with a very small buffer, which means that it makes sure that it doesn't drop any of the packets or frames, because video is 30 frames per second in North American standard. Now, of course, we can change that to a little slower, a little faster for better or worse quality. But essentially, that's what's happening when we are working with those kinds of filters. So it then transfers, in this case, through Zoom over to the computer, and that's what we engage with. So what next? Well, how do we supercharge that? Is we take that same idea here. I'm now sitting in front of the webcam. Instead of my webcam being directly controlled or monitored by Zoom, it's being monitored by OBS Studio. OBS Studio then is transferring that data from the program window through either NDI tools, which I haven't spoken about yet because that's a little bit more geeky, or more simply using OBS Virtual Cam, which I'm going to show you in a second. So from that program window, we put one little piece of software in between, which tricks Zoom into believing that this program output is your webcam. That then goes to your web conferencing, okay? So what do we need? This is what we need. We've already talked about OBS Studio Project and download, okay? Where to get that. Make sure that you click on the appropriate button to get the appropriate download. It's actually not that intuitive. We all just think they're graphics. These elements on the web page are the download buttons. So you want to make sure that you interact with those buttons appropriately. And then second, you need to go and download OBS Virtual Cam which is available at this address, as you can see here. Once you've installed that OBS virtual camera, we need to tell OBS to use it. Okay, now let me check what's on my next slide here. Yeah, perfect. So once both of those elements are installed, and I know people are going to ask for that URL again, so we'll paste it into the chat, or if somebody's already typed it, wonderful. Okay, I can come back to that later. Once it's all installed, this is what we need to do. And of course, you have reference to this video later, so you can pause it. But essentially, it's as simple as this. We open OBS, select the Tools button in the menu, and go to Virtual Cam. Enable Keep Aspect Ratio, and choose whether or not you want it to auto start. I do enable auto start because I use it all the time. And that means that next time I go start a Zoom session, I don't need to remember to go and turn it on because, you know, we tend to be forgetful. Now notice the target camera information. When you're installing OBS Virtual Cam, it will ask you, do you want to install 1 camera or 4 cameras? My recommendation is install 1 camera. That's all you need. For everything you'll be doing, 1 camera is fine. That should be your target camera, and take note of what it says, okay? OBS camera. Because then when you're in Zoom, you go down to the little video icon, click the up arrow, and select your webcam. You would select your OBS camera so that Zoom believes your program output window in OBS Studio is your webcam. Okay. Now, do note that as of the last revision to OBS Virtual Camera, it does now work in Zoom. It works in Meet. It works in WebEx. It does not work in Teams. Okay, so no problems there for most of them. Now, if you want something to work in Teams, I'll show you really quickly. Please ignore the Mac bit because it's pretty difficult. If you're on a Mac, there's a different solution and it's a lot more complex. We can talk about it, but not today. If you're on Windows, this works beautifully. NDI tools, which is, like I said earlier, a little bit geekier, but will do the same thing as OBS Virtual Cam, allowing Zoom to believe that your program window is the output window. Okay. I just want you to know that that is available. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is because NDI tools does work in Microsoft Teams. It's not difficult to configure. I probably have a screen, so I'll put it up. And here is how you would actually configure the NDI tools, recognizing that you need to turn on that little switch, which is in this case, the virtual input. You need to turn that service on your computer on because that's what's mediating between OBS and then your Zoom or your Teams or your Meet or WebEx platforms, okay? NDI tools works with all of those things and provides an awful lot more functionality. The reason I don't use it, even though it offers all the same functionality, is that there's a little bit more of a lag between what you say and do through OBS than going through that intermediary to your output platform like Zoom or Teams, etc. That's why I choose not to use it, is because the extra 5 frames of buffering drive me crazy, okay? So there's a real quick snapshot of some of the power, and I told you I wasn't going to focus on this because this tends to go over some folks' heads. But what I would like to do then instead is now I'm going to bring back my focus so I can see you a little better, bring back my Zoom window, and I would like to turn it to questions because like I said, I'd talk for about a half hour and I think I just went over my limit. Yeah, I did. I went 42 minutes. Sorry about that. And now I'll open my chat window and actually look at what you're saying. Or please feel free to press and hold your space bar and like a walkie-talkie, and that will temporarily unmute your microphone for the duration of your space bar press. Go ahead and speak your questions so that I don't have to read because I'm lazy.
So Greg, this is Kent. If you're comfortable, then if you can handle the discussion, then I don't need to jump in and moderate. If I do need to, just I'll try to read between the lines and jump in if I need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I am comfortable. So please, by all means, if you feel that there is open air, go ahead and speak to me.
Hi, Greg. I was wondering about changing the aspect ratio of my webcam. I'm in my bedroom and I just want to cut off, like I have a tiny screen behind me, but it doesn't cut off or cover up everything. So what would you suggest if we didn't have a big green screen?
Sure. If you don't have a big green screen, so do you already have OBS installed?
Yes.
You're amazing. Okay. So number one, and let me actually switch my screen here so that we can do this live together. How about that? Which one do I want to use here? I'm going to use this and transition. Okay. So now you can see my OBS again. All right. And so I'm speaking to you through it. I'll go back to my example scene. And when you have your capture device configured, so in my case, it's Logitech HD, okay, or Logi HD, go to the properties setting, okay? And one of the most confusing parts for folks on this particular configuration is what you'll see in your resolution FPS is typically it will say default. Quite often, your computer actually doesn't know what the default is, so it squishes it to a 4:3 aspect ratio, okay? So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you actually manually type in the resolution. If you know you have a high definition 1080p webcam, like I do, here you see I've typed in 1920 by 1080. That immediately makes sure that I'm not being cut off outside of my camera's field of view, so I have a lot of space to play with. That's number one. So make sure that you know that you don't have to stay on default, and I actually recommend don't stay on default. Find out what your resolution is. Then number two, in the filters window, okay, you have the ability to add audio and video filters, but more importantly, let's talk about the effect filters. And you'll see that there's crop pad, which I think is answering your question more specifically. If I apply a crop, I can now take off whatever elements of my video I want, so I could have just my eyeballs showing, should I so choose. Okay, so if I did that, it's as simple as, and you'll see it in my program window here. Let me just type in a number like 70. Notice how I just zoomed in a little bit. Oh, I put my phone too close to my speaker. And it will crop me in. Let's go even further since I know it's 1920. Let's go 600. So you see how it cropped out my arm. I'm gone. And I can do the same thing over here so that now I'm zooming in to just the field of view area where my small green screen might be. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm obviously not going to do that. There. Okay. Now I did see a question. Someone said, what if you make a mistake? And I'm assuming you meant with one of these layers. So for example, I had my example here, okay, and let me bring that back up. What if I didn't want this image? I have a few, and let's assume that that's a mistake you were talking about. I can either A, just poke out the eyeball and get rid of it, or B, if I go to the properties of any layer, I can change it. So if I wanted a different image, I can browse for the different image, okay? Now, when it comes to background images, and I'll show you one of my other, and this might look kind of crazy, my speaker focus, which is just me on top of whatever I want in the background. Take a look at how many layers I actually have in this source list. And that enables me to very quickly change what you see. So for example, if I want this to look like, oops, that was awesome. There we go. If I want this to look like my office at work, I actually turn on my office and turn off the other background layer. And now people think I'm in my physical office at the university. A lot of people believe it because the lighting matches up and all that sort of thing. Okay, so remember that you can have layers there that you're not using. The other thing you'll notice is I organize my backgrounds into different folders. Okay, how do you do that? You can add a group folder at the bottom and move things into that folder. Now I saw a chat pop up, and so I'm assuming that's what I was supposed to read. Yes, so where do we house the videos created? So the nice thing is, once we've actually created a video, so you'll notice that I'm recording right now, which you can see right above my head here, and I can stop the recording. Once I've stopped recording, it goes into a folder that's been specified in my settings, okay? And here you'll see that my recording go to a particular spot on my computer. They are being saved as MP4s, and now I can bring them. Where do I recommend putting them? If it's for my students and I'm an Office 365 school, I'm going to bring it into Stream, Microsoft Stream, which is a part of the Office 365 platform. And it has a very cool feature where as soon as you bring it into Stream, instead of just a folder in your OneDrive or something like that, but if you bring it into Stream, Microsoft will automatically transcribe it for you, and you get a full transcript of everything that's been said. Now, I've tested that extensively, and with my voice and the way I speak, it is about 99.5% accurate. Okay, so that's phenomenal. So store it there. Why? You already have the permission to do so with everything, given that you have informed consent if you're an Office 365 school. If you're a Google school, you have consent there. Go ahead and create a shared drive for your students or stick it in your Google Classroom. That's absolutely what I'd recommend. You can also, once you have videos in Stream, you can have those embedded in your Microsoft Teams area or your SharePoint site, your classroom sites there, okay? So great question. I see another one. Do you have recommendations on purchasing green screens? Yes. So a green bed sheet is good enough in OBS. As I showed you here, this is an off-colored green t-shirt of mine, and it works quite well, provided I have decent lighting. Okay. I have a window to my side here, and then I have 3 different light bulbs that are getting rid of as many shadows as possible in the background. Now, if the sun comes in my window, I actually go and adjust my filter ever so slightly so that I reduce the similarity, and that way I get a better green screening. At night when I'm recording, I have my lights turned on, and I have to go and change my green screen filter ever so slightly because the lighting conditions have changed. In a studio where we have all these beautiful soft lights, I would never have to adjust the setting. But it's so fast to do so, as you saw. Again, I right-click, go filters, okay, green screen, change my similarity, and I'm done. It takes me a matter of seconds, okay? Recognizing that's there. Now, someone asked about, the green screens. So that's recommendation 1. If you have a green bed sheet, like a king-size sheet, actually I can show you here. Watch what happens when I tilt my camera up. There's my wall, and that is my blue painter's tape and green painter's tape. That's all along the edge of this giant green screen piece of fabric. This piece of fabric came from AliExpress, which you can go online to AliExpress and cost $13. So you can do that. If they're back ordered, which they might be, what you can also do is go to Rona and purchase green screen green paint. Okay, it's called Disney Green. And what a lot of my students have done is painted either a large piece of cardboard or bought a piece of balsa wood and painted the balsa wood, because balsa is very light, of course. That's the reason. Let me see. I'm looking through the chats here to see if there's anything I've missed. If you want to write a formula. Okay, so excellent, excellent question. And this is something that a lot of folks do. If you want to write a formula or a calculation, okay, what I would do very specifically is I would go pick my lower right, but let me go pick a different monitor here. Okay, so now you can see that I'm on my second monitor. Okay, so on my second monitor, let me go to transition to it. There, now you're all seeing what I'm seeing. Up here, this is actually a PowerPoint, and there are a couple of things you could do. Now, of course, I could open Smooth Draw, which I would recommend if I'm doing a lot of calculations, or I might open my OneNote or something like that and use the draw tools that we have available. But if I actually just click the pen tool, which for whatever reason, oh, I know why, I was on the last slide. So let's go ahead and fix that for a quick second. Boom. So now it's a white screen. Okay. Now, if I select the pen tool, I can go ahead and do whatever annotations we want to. But what's better than that, and let me see if it's actually plugged in right now, it might not be, is to get yourself one of these, which if you don't have a touch screen enabled device, and mine isn't plugged in, so that's why you see me bending over to the side here. I'm finding a USB port that's not in use, and I am plugging in. There we go. Now, what this does for me is it turns my second monitor into a touch-enabled, let's see. Okay, and of course, we can square root it all. We can do whatever it is that we want. Okay, so this is a really effective tool. And of course, if I want to, I can say that everybody should love me. And now, isn't that pretty? I know, I play. It's just good fun. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one that was early on. If someone doesn't have two screens, is this still, you know, what you've explained, doable?
It is. Okay, so I'm going to flip back to my laptop display so that you can again see what's going on here. Now watch what happens when I click transition here, and you'll see kind of a fancy one. It's not one of the defaults. So that little Gerber spin is being recorded with sound effects, okay, because I've programmed it in. So you can add any transition that you would like if you know how to create them. But the defaults are fade, slide, and you can, here, I'll show you. You've got swipe from the left, from the right, from the top, from the bottom, sliding, etc. Stinger, which is the little video file like my G spin or my NYIT stingers and those types of things. Fading to blue, for example, or my company color, and then fading to my next video, or doing a luminosity wipe, which means I have a graphic file that can be modeled and it will kind of like a smoke glass window effect. Now those transitions, if you're running a single monitor, yes, you can do it. It just means that you're going to be running OBS in the background, and you really have to keep your brain in a good space where you're thinking about what's being shown on that program window. Now, if I'm only using one scene, it's very simple because I know that I start record, I'm using that scene, and anything that's in the program window is going to be recorded. Okay, so this can be minimized in behind. If I want to use more than one scene with one monitor, then you need to do something that's a little more advanced. I'm not going to open it right now. It's actually quite simple to use, but you'll see here that I have something called Macro Deck. Okay, and you can Google that. Macro Deck is a free piece of software where it will allow me to also open Macro Deck on my phone. And if I do, so you can see I've got, well, you probably can't see that, but a little icon there will hit Macro Deck, and it will allow me to connect to the computer. And then I have big buttons, which will allow me to transition just by touching my phone. And that way, OBS does not need to be in the foreground. It's actually running a server that connects to my phone. So yes, you can do it. And you can be, and I actually use that quite often. I was actually having a problem with an upgrade just before I started today's session. Otherwise, I would have been running it. So that's why I did not show that to you today. That's kind of the nuts and bolts. And what I really wanted to do was give you the big ideas and the ability. Now, yes, you'll go into each one of the different layer types, and you'll be right-clicking and looking at what's available for the filters and what they do. I would say go and play. If you feel like you broke something, don't worry about it. Click on that source or that layer and hit the little minus key down at the bottom, and it's deleted. And then you can start over. Or poke out the eye and just make it not visible for a while. And then you can go back to it and look at it. But you're not going to break anything within the program.
Go back. Couple things with Zoom. We have parents who are asking us that they want to use their Zoom accounts, their school Zoom accounts, to actually have play dates online with other kids. Now, these are on our own devices, our school devices, not their home devices. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say that's not going to be an issue. You know, it's not device centric, and their account could be used on a mobile device as well, just as well. The biggest suggestion to them would be that once they initiate a play date, use a password. So when they're creating the scheduled interaction, turn on a password. And number two, make sure that they know they can lock the meeting once the play date participants have joined, which means they've completely disabled anyone's ability to join that hasn't been invited.
I guess the one thing I'm worried about is, as a school, like condoning this, you know, thinking about safer schools, like all of that kind of stuff, right? Is that there are lots of them who are young who may not have a parent around with them doing this, and things can be happening that we don't have control over. What you think?
Yeah, no, and to be honest, you don't have control over it. So whether it's a school account or not, or a school device or not, they can all sign up for a free Zoom account. And even beyond that, they don't need the account. They only need one person with the account, and they can send out the invitation to people that don't have it. They can still join that session.
Okay, thanks.
So,
I have one more question, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no problem. But
I had something that wild. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this today on Zoom. So I actually am a principal, but I'm right now helping to teach a class. And I set up this class and was on it, and my internet dropped, but the meeting continued without me as the host, no co-host, nothing. And it took me 5 more minutes to get back on, like to reboot and everything. And I didn't have to, Mike, it went right back to the meeting. So all these kids were left on, like, unsupervised because I wasn't on it.
Yeah.
Is there a way to prevent that?
Yes, the best way to prevent that is to make sure that you're not hosting a meeting on wireless. So where possible, connect via a internet cable. Okay, that's what I'm holding up here. Oh, turns out it's yellow, so it's green screen. But connect with a physical cable is the biggest thing, because you don't want to have that happen. There's no way to protect. It's this, basically it has the same effect of saying leave meeting, and not end meeting for all, right?
Which is what you talked about last time.
Correct. And where the network just drops like that, I think Zoom has made the decision that it's less obtrusive and less problematic to allow the host to reconnect than to blow everyone out of the meeting. And there is no setting that you can enable that will just kill the meeting if the host leaves. Unless the host says end for all, of course. So no, the biggest thing is take the steps of prevention where you don't use wireless. I never trust wireless when I'm leading a meeting. I've even had an issue in the past where my main home internet goes down, and the biggest thing was don't panic. It took me about 90 seconds to get back on, but I understand the pain.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. All right.
Thanks, Tracy, for bringing those two questions up. We're pretty much ready to sign off unless anybody else wants to quickly jump in. All right, hearing nothing, then I'm going to call this meeting to a close. Thanks again, Greg, and we'll hope to do something similar to this in the future. Thanks again, Janet, as well, for all the work that you continue to do, and to all the schools and principals and teachers who are still online. Thank you also for all the work that you do supporting BC's kids and working together to do so.
Hey, you got it, and good luck. I hope to see some really great video production. I know I did this with Mike Slinger not long ago, who's part of your group, and he's been sending me things going, man, this is incredible. So I know it's doable. Have fun.
Good.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
All right, y'all. Take care.
Thank you, Greg.
You betcha.